Keep up to date everywhere. News Talk 820 WBAP.
In the WBAP newsroom.
Depending on who you talk to, the White House is getting all kinds of legal advice. You got Krauthammer, you got Judge Andrew Napolitano, Jay Sekulow. We'll get into all of those evaluations. And we've also got some advice to offer here on the Chris Salcedo Show for the Trump White House, courtesy of one of our legal eagles. His name is Byron Henry. He's an appellate law expert with the law firm Scheef and Stone, L.L.P. in Dallas, Fort Worth's area in Dallas, Texas. Byron, welcome back to the Chris Salcedo Show.
Great to be with you, Chris.
Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that your prescription is being echoed by the likes of Jay Sekulow, and I think what's going on today, because you and I talked about this last night, and you and I had a 15-minute off-the-air conversation about what's going on here with the Ninth Circus, and ultimately we're thinking the Supreme Court. Give me your evaluation of, first off, what the Ninth Circuit did, because a bunch of liberals hit Facebook and social media yesterday and said, oh, the Ninth Circuit declared Trump's ban unconstitutional, and that is a complete and bold-faced lie by the American liberal, correct?
That is correct. The Ninth Circuit simply said that the temporary travel ban executive order by President Trump would remain temporarily on hold while the lower court gets full briefing and takes evidence and has a full injunction hearing. So that's all that occurred. Now, the opinion did ascribe some constitutional dimension to the decision with respect to due process, but in doing so, it did use a little bit of sleight of hand by addressing most of its opinion to the constitutional rights of lawful permanent residents, as we talked about, despite the fact that the administration said within days of the issuance of the executive order that these executive orders did not apply to green card holders or lawful permanent residents. So what remains to be seen is when we finally get to the real case, which the Ninth Circuit really didn't address that much, and that is everyone else other than green card holders, just what constitutional rights are they talking about with respect to people that are asylum seekers, refugees, people that have never been in this country or overseas and abroad and actually are in the country? That remains to be seen, and I think that is the Trump administration will fare much better when we focus on the actual application of these executive orders.
Yeah, and that's the slippery slope. And by the way, now we have an attorney general, so things are going to be a lot more focused from the executive branch and from the government now that Attorney General Jeff Sessions is on the job. But on that broader point, what really alarmed me was the extremist, liberal, Democrat-appointed mostly Ninth Circuit focused on the possibility, leaving the door open to saying some guy sitting on the street in Syria has constitutional protections under our laws, which is just patently absurd.
Yeah, there's no authority, at least it's been pointed out to me, and I've looked for it myself, especially the cases I've read that were cited by the Ninth Circuit. There's no authority for the proposition that there are constitutional rights, due process rights, with respect to people that have never been in the country, do not have green cards, or are lawful permanent residents. And that was troubling. And what was a little more troubling was one thing the Ninth Circuit got right was they reaffirmed that the courts do have a role to play in this drama, though they also affirmed correctly that the judiciary's role when it comes to immigration and national security is not the starring role. It is a backup role, and they cited case law that says in matters of national security and immigration, the judiciary defers heavy deference, not just deference, but heavy deference to the political branches, Congress and the executive. So they got that right. But what they didn't get right was they actually didn't apply very much deference in the opinion, even after acknowledging they should. And they didn't take the Trump administration's word at face value, the executive, the president of the United States elected by the people, that this executive order did not apply to a class of aliens. They basically called out the Trump administration and said, well, because we've heard so many things and you said things on the campaign trail and we can't really tell what's true or not until we actually see it in writing, we're not going to take your word for it. And I thought that was not only uncalled for, but probably incorrect legally with respect to whether or not they should have applied this. They should have taken the Trump administration's word on that.
No, I agree with you. But of course, if it's illegal, liberals are all about it. So and that's what they do. Look, I want to. By the way, Byron Henry is our guest right now, folks. Appellate law expert with the law firm Scheef and Stone in Dallas, Texas. I want to to narrow down the scope of what the court did and didn't do. And I think this is what's happening right now inside of the White House. There was a directive that you mentioned that was saying, okay, green card holders, they're not affected. Those who have been previously reviewed are not affected. But that wasn't in the executive order. Conventional wisdom is saying now the Trump administration will redraw the executive order, place that carve-out for that very small group in there, and then the Ninth Circus will have no other choice but to acknowledge, okay, with that carve-out, it's over and done. And let's move on. And if it goes on to the Supreme Court, then ultimately the Supreme Court will uphold it with that carve-out. Is that what you're thinking they're going to do?
Well, either they can issue a presidential directive, because the Ninth Circuit didn't say the executive order had to say it, just that the narrowing had to come from the president. So they could do one of two things. They could redraw the executive order and specify the classes of aliens that are affected, because that would take away the Ninth Circuit's reliance on uncertainty, because they acted like, well, we don't really know how this is going to be applied. So they could make it clear either through a new executive order or another executive action or directive from the president, not from White House counsel, but from the president, that this is how we're going to apply this executive order. And that would relieve some of the uncertainty. And what it would do, I'm not sure it would end the case, because what it would do would put the Ninth Circuit and the district judge in the position of now actually having to flesh out exactly what statutory or constitutional rights non-green card holders, visa applicants, asylum seekers, and refugees and others that are not in this country and do not have a right to be in this country other than as it's granted by Congress or the president in his discretion. What rights do they have without relying on the straw man of green card holders to back up their opinion? And I think you're going to find that there is very sparse authority for that, and that's something I think the Supreme Court would have something to say about.
Right, and you got Krauthammer out there saying that he ought to that Trump ought to let the stay remain, and if we're attacked, you can basically say, hey, look what happens when you put liberals in charge. We're under Obama's vetting processes. The liberals have stopped me from trying to secure the country and be nakedly political about this. You've got Jay Sekulow who's saying, put the directive inside of the executive order and be done with it. And you've got Napolitano saying something completely different, saying go to the Supreme Court, because I think that there are some who are on the Supreme Court, like Justice Kagan, who are saying, you know what, that this is fully in the jurisdiction exclusively of the President of the United States, and she might rule in your favor. What is the advice you're giving?
Well, I think you could go to the Supreme Court. The problem I have with going to the Supreme Court is twofold. Once the Department of Justice lost in the lower court, and they wanted to issue a stay. See, in the lower court, the burden's on the state of Washington and Minnesota to prove, number one, that they even have standing to bring this, which is another issue that's going to come full circle in this case as it proceeds, is can Washington and Minnesota even file a suit for everybody in the country and all these people in other countries that have no rights? I mean, what is Minnesota's interest in doing so? So we'll have to figure that out as well. The problem is it flips the burden, and now the government has to prove that the burden's on the government. And with the Supreme Court split 4-4, Justice Kagan doesn't have to say she agrees with the lower court. All she would have to do.
Wait a minute, hold on. You just said something interesting, and I've only got about 15 seconds. But you said the burden was flipped. Is that proper? Isn't it? Doesn't the burden lie on the states of Minnesota and Washington to prove?
It does in the lower court, and they made it, according to that judge. So if you try to upend the process by getting a stay of that judge's ruling, the burden flips back on the person trying to get the stay, which is, of course, the government in this case. So because of the procedural posture, I think with the 4-4 split, it's a long shot at the Supreme Court at this stage. But by the time you get to the injunction stage, Chris, I think you'll have a Justice Gorsuch on the court, and you'll have 9 justices, and there'll be an uneven number to decide this. So I think I'm for simply maybe redrawing a directive with respect to the executive order and then just allowing this to play out. I mean, you can go to the Supreme Court. If you lose, you're not losing on the merits. You're just going to.
Yeah, I got you, Byron. Yeah, in the meantime, hundreds of Syrians keep on coming into this country every single day. Byron Henry, appellate law expert with the law firm Scheef and Stone, L.L.P. in Dallas, Texas. Sir, appreciate the time and the expertise as always here on the program.
Anytime.